Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. We got our winter weather, I should say our fall weather, finally blew in yesterday. We've had a really nice early fall, but it's chilly right now. We've got a pretty good wind blowing. And I wanted to come out and just kind of fish around a little bit, and because the main lake is a little bit too heavy for a video, I figured I'd get back in some of the slop and try to take advantage of the end of year shallow grass bite before everything dies off. You know, we got a big pad field here that I'm going to be flipping around in, hopefully generate some bites, maybe some milfoil, maybe some matted, blown up, torn up grass vegetation. Really going to be flipping around anything that we can find, and the fish are still utilizing for heat. That's one of the things, when you have these cold nights, the fish will start looking for objects that hold heat, and your matted up vegetation, your thick pads, your cattails, anything like that will hold some heat. So that's what we're going to be looking for, because I don't expect it to get any warmer today. Based on what I saw, cold temperatures with that wind blows that cool air against the surface, drops the water temp quick. So anything that can retain that heat is going to be the objects we're looking for. I'm gonna flip around a Dirty Jigs no jack jig today. This is just their no jack punching jig right here. You can see a very specifically designed head on it to punch through cover well. And I am gonna throw a smaller trailer on it. So I'm just gonna use, this is just a little 3-inch Pit Boss, and I'm gonna thread this up. But I want to show you something when I rig this, because the hook is a really stout hook. I mean, this hook is made to handle your heaviest of stuff that you can throw. So I've got a heavy action rod, 65-pound braid, but I want a small compact bait still, and it's a full-size jig. But I'm going to trim down the skirt so to allow my kicker legs to move a little bit. That skirt being just a little bit too long for such a little trailer is going to hamper the motion of it. So I'm just going to trim it down so that my legs are not being restricted by the skirt, because if it only takes a couple pieces of skirt material to actually prevent the legs from kicking. So I'm just going to trim this up. You can see there I've got a couple more, and then I'm also going to trim just a few pieces of material from underneath the skirt. You know, a bigger, bulkier bait is generally not what you want when punching, but in this case, you know, the design of this jig and the fact this is the 3/4 ounce, it might actually go up to a 1 ounce or even 1.25 ounces, to see if, you know, that helps me get through. I'm not quite sure how heavy everything's going to be, but if I can remove just a little bit of material, it allows the skirt to flare better under the water, and it also just helps me punch through. It's less objects to grab onto, a piece of grass or something that will actually prevent the bait from going through. But I get a lot of questions, and I'll show you in action and kind of give you some tips while I'm fishing it. But I get a lot of questions from people whether I like to fish jigs in mats or whether it's just straight heavy Texas rigs. And I really do like to fish jigs, and honestly, the jigs are going to get you a bigger bite. So the other thing I want to point out too is I do shorten up the weed guard just a little bit. I'm going to take probably about a 1/16 of an inch off on that weed guard. I like it to be about 1/8 of an inch over the tip. And in this case, I'm going to take just a couple of strands off the top. Probably, I'm going to say maybe 1/4 of the strands. And that just helps me get a better hook set. And it should not prevent me at all from being able to get the bait through the vegetation. So let's punch around. I got to warm up the hands and see if we can't catch a few bass out of the remaining grass that we've got out here. So a lot of times it's about figuring out where the fish are within some of these big fields. You know, I'm out here on the grass edge or the pad edge right now, and we've got about, the boat's in almost 4 foot of water, 3.5, and it generally just tapers up to where up by the top end where you got the cattails up there, you're talking only a few inches of water. But that doesn't mean the fish aren't going to be up there, especially this time of year. You know, there's a couple of things going on. One, we got the falling water temperatures which means, you know, generally the deeper water won't fluctuate as much, but the wind is also blowing cooler surface temperature up to this edge. So it wouldn't surprise me if the fish go from the edge further back in. The other thing that happens this time of year is you know, when you get down to about 60-degree water temp, a lot of the frogs will start pulling out of the marsh areas that they're in, and they'll actually start pulling out, and they hibernate in these mud bottom areas. Well, these mud bottom areas then become good areas for bass to feed on those frogs. So those a lot of times you're talking those frogs, they'll just pull out, you know, into a few foot of water. So it's possible the fish are actually up further in a lot shallower water. So we're just going to try to figure it out. Generally they're not going to be super shallow, but you never know. You got to let the conditions kind of dictate what it is that you should be doing. And we just got out. It's just something that we got to keep in mind. I think too often anglers get out and they just, right off the bat, they think they know exactly what they need to do. And sometimes you do know, especially if you know a lake well enough, you can have that figured out. But I like to show up and basically let the fish tell me where they're at. You know, if you can understand some of the surroundings as to what's going on, it'll help you dial it in, hopefully. But don't ever write something off just because you don't think it should be the way it is. Nice one. Right in the snow. That's a good one. Nice, healthy, chunky fish. Right in the snout. Right through. That's exactly where you want to hook it. You can see it goes right through. Let's get him back. Out on the edge. That's probably a 3 1/4 really fat bass. Bait's in good shape. So that's one of those bites where I flipped in there and I didn't feel anything, but when I picked up on it, it just had weight. Nothing moved. So, you know, a lot of times in that situation, I think the best thing to do is just give it a second. I just held the line for a minute to see if I felt anything that remotely felt like a fish pulling back. You know, if you have something where a fish pulls back like that, set the hook. And if it's a pad stem, which sometimes it is, you got a free hook set out of it. You practice, right? It's always worth doing that. But this no jack punching jig is so good for this. You know, the design, it's a bullet head design basically. So it's, in my opinion, it's almost identical to flipping a heavier Texas rig. In this case though, you get the benefits of a jig. big one. Golly. May have found a little pod in the old pads here. That's even a little bit better than that last one. Right in the face again. So one thing to point out here, I literally just caught that last bass probably, I don't know, 10 feet. I picked the power poles down. I was like, I'm gonna start picking this apart a little bit. And that is such a key. Anytime fishing heavy cover, heavy grass like this, or pads, any of your thick cover, it's amazing how much the fish will group up in one little area. You know, so when you get a bite, throw your power poles down and just pick it apart, because that's really what I did. I'm like, okay, I got that bite, let's see, maybe there's a group of them here. And I mean, it was a handful of pitches later and generated another bite. And that's after, you know, we've gone a little while without a bite, and then boom, 2 bites back to back, both of them out on the edge, which is you know, I guess where I would expect the bites. But like I said earlier, you never know exactly where they're gonna come, so don't force that. So I'm gonna pick it apart and just see what I can do. And the jig is such a good thing for doing that, especially when you're fishing pads like this, or even some like matted milfoil that's not just one giant mat. You can almost work the jig better than a Texas rig, or better than other baits, which is one of the reasons why I think a jig can be superior over a Texas rig when fishing stuff like this. You know, a heavy jig, I'm actually working it back through the pad stems. Now, could I do that with a Texas rig? Probably, but I'm not gonna get the same movement, the same look out of it. You know, a heavy Texas rig, if I had a 1 ounce Texas rig on, it's just like it overpowers most of the soft plastics that you're fishing. You know, with a jig is different because it's still got enough bulk and volume to allow it to be worked. In fact, what I would say is that when selecting the right jig, you probably go about a 1/4 ounce heavier than you would if you were just flipping a Texas rig. So, you know, if you're going to throw a 3/4 ounce Texas rig, I generally feel like a 1 ounce jig has about the same performance. Now in this case, I am fishing a 3/4 ounce jig, but that's because I'm not fishing anything super heavy. If I found something heavier, I would go heavier, but at this point the 3/4 ounce jig is working just fine, and it just allows me to work the bait a little bit better. Another nice one. That's a good one. Got that thing choked. Come here. Golly, these are nice fish. Good, healthy chunks. That hook has got him. Golly. That's the one thing. So the no jack punching jig has an extra heavy, large, wide gap. I'm gonna have to get the pliers on that one. I think I can't get that thing out. It's just the perfect hook for punching. You just don't lose the fish on it. Come on. And for your heavy gear, that's a nice one. They're getting bigger. That was probably a 3.5. That super sharp big wide gap, extra heavy hook just can withstand everything. When you hook the fish with it, you do not lose the fish. That's the crazy thing. And the one thing with this bait, or with the hook, it is heavy to the point where you need to throw it on heavy gear. Like, this is 65-pound braid I've got here. This is an FP 936 flipping stick, and then I've got a Xenon Abu Garcia Xenon X 8.0 to 1 reel. I want a little faster, a faster one to be able to catch up to the line, get them out. But this is heavy gear to be able to drive that big hook home. But when you drive that big hook home, you're not losing them. All three bass I've had this morning now have just been hooked fantastic. Like, you won't lose them. But you gotta have the rod and reel and line to be able to drive that hook home. Nice one. Long. He's not as fat as the last ones. On that edge, 2.5 pounder. So much fun. Every one right on the edge now. So at this point, I might actually start concentrating more on the edge versus wasting my time in, because I still have yet to have a bite. Every bite I've had has been in the first 10 feet of the grass, or I keep calling it grass, of the pads. One question I probably will get from viewers too is, when do you throw a Texas rig versus something like the no jack punch and jig? And you know, for me, there's a couple of really important factors. You know, I think in a lot of instances, you know, they're very interchangeable, but for me, the fall fishing period, the jig is significantly better. I don't know if it's just the bigger, bulkier profile or it's the slower fall, but the jig really shines for me in the fall, as well as in the spring though, when you've got really stable conditions. If I've got cold front conditions in the spring, I think a smaller profile bait will generally do better. But if I've got good stable conditions, the jig will get you better than average size bites. I mean, as you've seen today, I've caught 4 really nice quality fish, and the jig just is better overall. And in the springtime, a lot of your bigger females would much rather eat a jig than a smaller Texas rig. The Texas rig for punching really shines when you're fishing really heavy stuff, in my opinion. You know, if you've got canopy of hydrilla or really thick milfoil generally doesn't get that thick. I would say it's more really heavy hydrilla, or a lot of times you can get that blown in chopped up grass that just forms mats that are so thick, or a big hyacinth where you just need a really small profile that's super heavy, and that's where I would tend to throw that over a jig. But a lot of times interchangeable, but there's definitely time and place where the jig will outproduce, in my opinion. I say this pretty much with every type of technique that you fish. You always want to try to find those key little sweet spots, you know, the little anomalies. So in this case, you know, ideally some of the best looking stuff is going to be any of your little points, any places where the wind might be blowing in on it, because that creates wind driven current. The little patches of cut up grass that are floating around. You know, maybe you got a place where you've got a little deeper water that butts up against the pads. Maybe you got a little clump of cattails that fit into the grass or into the pad somewhere. You're just looking for something different. You know, that doesn't mean you won't catch fish just from going down a row of pads, but it's believe me when I say you increase the chances of catching fish when you have another piece of cover mixed in. It's just unbelievable how much those fish will gravitate to it. You know, it could be when you're talking about pads, a lot of times it's just a pad root that sticks up. It acts like a log. But it's critical. It's critical. I can't stress enough. I don't care if you're fishing a crankbait or fishing, you know, a frog or flipping a jig like this. Anytime you can find something that's not, you know, the normal. You know, if you got a big rock flat that you're fishing and there's a log on it, that's going to be something that's just not normal on it. Maybe it's a rock flat, but then all of a sudden you got a giant boulder. It's the only boulder around. Fish gravitate to things that are just a little bit different in the area that they're living. So it's just something to keep in mind. And you know, if you see something that's different in whatever it is that you're fishing, that's going to be probably the best high percentage thing you have in that area. Just got a little deeper. Like I said, just got a little deeper. Another nice one. They're gonna go for it. Oh, that's probably too big for that. Another 3-pounder, 3 1/4. Put the poles down. Get that hook out. Nice chunky fish, really working up for the fall. Man, it's just, there was a little bit deeper water all of a sudden on this pad edge, and it just looked right. You know, it went from being shallow to the point where I couldn't see the edge, similar to where I've been catching my fish. And it's like I was just saying, something a little bit different. That's all it takes, something a little bit different. And I can't stress enough how good this jig is. The Dirty Jigs No Jack punching jig, I mean, it's specifically designed for that. So that bullet shaped head punches through. Now it's not a straight shank hook, but it's a straight shank hook when you design the head in the manner that they have. Meaning the hook is, it's positioned so that the line tie is first. That allows you to punch through and pull through. If you were just to say, take another jig, your line tie is going to be probably a 60. And the way the jig head's going to be designed, it's going to come off up here, and then that's going to catch the grass. But in this case, because your line tie is going through first, it makes it every bit as weedless as a standard Texas rig where your bullet weight's going through first. It's what's the design is what's so critical with this being a good punch and jig. And there's a reason that it's, you know, a top seller, because people love it. You go to places where they fish a lot of really heavy cover, whether that's up here in Wisconsin where we have stuff like this, or maybe it's down in Florida. If you're a heavy cover flipper that likes fishing this type of stuff, if you don't know about the no jack punch and jig already, then you do now. But most people, I feel like, are already aware of it, and that's why it's a really good seller to begin with. But why don't we end it there? I feel like you guys have seen what a good punch and jig can do. It's actually started to mist on me pretty good. My hands are frozen, so we might just call it a day and go on in. But regardless, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I know I did. This was fun. And thanks for watching. I'll put links to the bait in the video description for you. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let me oh, I thought that was a bite. Nope, pad stem. Yeah, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video if you are already a subscriber. That little bit helps in terms of spreading the good word. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned. New video coming out tomorrow.